So if I say to you, be careful how much salt you eat. You're eating too much salt. If you eat too much salt, you'll get high blood pressure, your increased risk of heart attack, hypertension, hardening of the arteries. It's all bad. Just don't eat too much salt. It's bad for you. Does that sound familiar? Probably. Here's the thing, though, that you may not realize. Salt can increase blood pressure in people who have salt sensitivity. If you don't have salt sensitivity, eating too much salt probably isn't going to have any impact on your cardiovascular health. So, are you salt sensitive? Well, statistically, the chances of you being salt sensitive are about 1 in 5. About 20% of the population is salt sensitive. For those individuals, it is relevant how much salt they eat in terms of not eating too much because it can be dangerous. For the other 80% of the population, it isn't. Now, did you know that? Probably not. You'd be forgiven for not knowing that, because if you go online and you Google, is salt bad for you? You'll get lots of really helpful websites. WebMD, this doctor, the NHS, whoever will tell you, oh yes, eating too much salt can cause high blood pressure and blah, blah. They won't tell you if you're salt sensitive, if you're that 1 in 5 people who is salt sensitive. They figure, well, better be safe. We'll just tell everybody to avoid salt, and then you're going to catch that 1/5. Doesn't really matter that you're lying to the other 4/5 of people out there. We're not lying. We're not lying. We're not telling the whole truth. Well, this is an abuse of science. We want people to take the science of climate change seriously. Then we need to be consistent and honest in our use of science. And the fact is that there are too many times that you could point to where people who may be well-intentioned have used science to mislead people. I'm going to give you another example, and this is to do with secondhand smoke. Now, there's an article I'm relying heavily on here, but I've done quite a bit of reading about this. This particular article is from Slate. It was published on February 13th of 2017, and it is called "We Used Terrible Science to Justify Smoking Bans." And what it talks about is back in 2003, there was a scientific paper published about a smoking ban in Helena, Montana, a relatively small town that had seen a 60% reduction in heart attacks almost immediately upon instituting a ban on smoking in public places. A local court then overturned that ban, and the heart attack rate shot back up again. And this made international news. Suddenly we saw a few other scientific studies from other relatively small communities that also reported big changes in the incidence of heart attacks when you would ban smoking in public places. So this swept the globe. Secondhand smoke kills, and secondhand smoke or smoking bans in public places are absolutely justified because of the danger smoking presents, not just to people who are smoking the cigarettes, but the people around them. Now, that was 2003. People went off the hook as a result of these reports. Do you know that since that time, science actually has shown something very, very different? Again, you would be forgiven for not knowing that. Because again, we have a lot of well-intentioned people out there pushing bad science. Now, the risk of cardiovascular disease and morbidity from secondhand smoke is extremely minor. Oh, but actually, I want to just go back a little bit because some of the claims that were made when this first took off. Here we go. We got groups across the country stated that even a half hour of secondhand smoke exposure, 30 minutes, causes heart damage similar to that of habitual smokers. The Association for Non-Smokers in Minnesota wrote a press release that stated that just 30 seconds of exposure could make coronary artery function of non-smokers indistinguishable from smokers. So the message in that is clear. Even the briefest exposure to secondhand smoke can kill you dead. Now, this was not accurate. we've had a lot of time to accumulate more evidence, and what we found was that a lot of these early studies were reflecting something that you do see in smaller communities. The incidence of heart attacks can fluctuate pretty dramatically over time in smaller communities, and it's not necessarily related to any particular external factor. It's just the vagaries of statistical randomness. And also, if you've got a smoking ban in a community and you don't see a corresponding change in the incidence of heart disease, are you going to publish a study about it, that it had no impact? Or in fact, after the smoking ban, heart attacks actually went up? And you wouldn't see a report like that because people wouldn't think to publish it. So you get a perception early on that the science is very clear and very strong, when in fact it wasn't at all. We've got a study here led by researchers at the RAND Corporation in 2010 that found that the large reductions identified in small communities were due to chance and were not repeatable. They also said that we find no evidence that legislated U.S. smoking bans were associated with short-term reductions in hospital admissions for acute myocardial infarction or heart attack, or other diseases in the elderly, children, or working-age adults. A 2012 study of 6 American states that instituted smoking bans came to a similar conclusion. So did a 2014 study, which is notable for being co-authored by some of the same researchers who had previously published papers suggesting that the Colorado towns of Pueblo and Greenlee had experienced reduced rates of heart attacks after implementing smoking bans. So we see some scientists coming around and saying, actually, we overstated this. It's not actually good science there. Just a couple other points I want to make on here. We're talking specifically about heart attacks, cardiovascular disease. Well, what about lung cancer? I don't want to be exposed to secondhand smoke because of the danger of lung cancer. Well, the science on that is even clearer, and that is that the incidence of lung cancer in people exposed to secondhand smoke is almost indistinguishable from non-smokers, or from people who aren't exposed to secondhand smoke. I think the incidence, let me read the numbers here. The 2006 Surgeon General's report, the most definitive treatment on the topic, estimates the lung cancer risk of chronically exposed non-smokers at just 1.12 to 1.43 times that of people without frequent exposure. What that boils down to is this. The danger with regard to lung cancer is a cumulative effect. It is not going to be increased significantly by exposure to cigarette smoke in a bar. If you live with someone who is a smoker, they smoke in the living room or in the bedroom, and you are exposed to that smoke all the time over a long period of time, then yes, that can increase the danger of cancer. But for the rest of us, it's not an issue. Now, why has this narrative taken hold that secondhand smoke is deadly when in fact it's not? And it's because that people feel that they are doing the right thing by reporting anything that discourages people from smoking. Smoking is deadly, it's incredibly self-destructive, and we're only doing a good thing if we discourage people from doing it. And so what if we're misrepresenting the facts? So what if we're publishing junk science in order to justify our moral crusade to shame smokers? I don't think that's acceptable. I think, there's got to be some level on which people can detect that this is BS, that it's not honest. To me, it is definitely a problem when so much doubt and so much cynicism exists right now with regard to science. There is so much, particularly on the conservative side of things, but not exclusively. I mean, look at all the anti-vaccine people on the left who are absolutely nuts about this stuff. There is a real issue now with the credibility of science, and we need to be consistent in how we report on it and talk about it, and be respectful of it and of each other. That's my 2 cents on this. Sorry about the rant.